Hi, this is Danny Ryan, and welcome to the Three Will Podcast. Today, I've got Chris Edwards here with me today. He's a senior software engineer. Chris, thanks for joining me.
Sure, glad to be here.
Great, I appreciate you taking time. I know you're very busy right now, so I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Lots
Um,
going on. It's all good.
I'm just another direction that you're getting pulled into to do. So, but I wanted to today's conversation, I wanted to focus in on the tool that we created to help people migrate from Jive into SharePoint and Office
Sure.
365. So if
Okay.
you just give me maybe just a description. I know we've had this conversation with a lot of customers, and I just wanted to sort
hmm
of capture this all together at once, but just give me maybe a description of what the tool is at a high level.
Okay, sure. So the tool itself, it's a single command line or console-based tool, and it was actually done. We produced it originally for our own internal use, for our own internal migration of Jive-specific content to our own Office 365. So we had a specific need. We had to move quickly, and move quickly means, let's go ahead and get something that's quick and dirty out and working.
Hmm.
So console-based tool was kind of the chosen technology. Very easy to create, right? Set up. Very easy to customize. Very easy to kind of wire up other APIs, that sort of thing. So kind of nice that it's turned into something that's pretty decent because a lot of times we get into customer organizations, customers that want to do very specific things. The tool itself does some pretty reusable stuff, but very easy to extend, right?
Hmm.
Not really focus on the UI and all the kind of the mud that you kind of get caught in with user expectations and all that stuff. This is specifically trying to get work done and specifically migration work done. So that's what it does and tries to do it well.
Awesome. And so tell me a little bit about the sort of the way the tool works as far as
Sure.
extracting out data. And I know it sounds like we've done some things where we gather some information about a client's Jive environment, and then we go and later on maybe pull the actual binaries and stuff like that. Tell me a little bit more about that whole process.
Yeah. So the nice thing about the tool, it actually, you can run multiple flavors of the command. The command line itself, you can easily pass different parameters in. So very traditional, nothing new, there. But the nice thing about it is that we can use the tool, and the way we structured our process around the tool is really to go after pulling the content first. So, and the nice thing about it as well is you can pull different levels of that content. So let's say you just want to get a backup of all your content in Jive and get it onto a file system or into SQL Server or some combination of the two. That's really how it's designed to work. What we can do is we can go after and get all the people references. So basically all the users that are in the Jive system, we can go after and gather those. And then typically we go after all of I call them places. In
Hmm.
Jive, there's a concept of space, project, and group. So I've used the generic term place to represent all three of those. What we do is we typically get the list of all the places, and that is something we try to do, be people in places up front as early on with the customer as possible so that
Hmm.
they can see, hey, this is the volume, this is how much stuff is out there at a high level, right? And then we use that information to map it into where it's going to end up residing, whether it's Office 365 or an on-premises SharePoint. It may be in different places. We can map those places. It's mainly a manual exercise, right? The tool itself, since we're dealing with a console-based tool, we're not, we're not trying to put everything in it.
Hmm.
We're leaning back on using Excel and using manual process in certain aspects to do the mapping and that exercise, right?
So
Um,
it
so
gives you like a listing of all these different places then, and then you can map them to where they go into in SharePoint.
exactly, you can choose this particular place. This particular place from Jive does not go into SharePoint at all. Maybe it just gets archived. So, and that's what it supports. So typically we get people, places, we use that information for analysis and working with the customer to map. And then we do another pool of, I call this an inventory pool, where we pull people, places again, get any updates, any deltas that have occurred maybe since the last time you ran it. And then it actually can go through and pull all the content from those places out of Jive into SQL Server and into a file system. And then anything, you can actually run another even layer on top of that if you want to pull all the social aspects. So if you want to pull all the commenting that was done on a Jive document or a discussion, you can go after that type of detail. People have liked things, you can go after that type of detail. So it's kind of layers of pull and inventory, how it works. And then you could stop there if you wanted to. And so the beautiful thing is that we had to get off Jive quickly. We wanted to get an inventory that we could work with, right? We originally designed the tool. So therefore, we can go back and let's say we shut Jive off completely. Well, we can take that inventory that we already have and just start pushing it into SharePoint at will. So it allows us to kind of, get off of Jive, get things organized, and then when we're ready, start pushing things into the target environment, whether it's Office 365 or SharePoint on premises or whatever. It could be anything, right, at that point.
And that inventory is stored in a SQL Server database and the file system? Is that the two places primarily?
Yes, SQL Server database for all the metadata and the relational structuring. So, like if you think about the concept of Jive, places or groups can contain other groups. You can do that kind of thing. So it maintains the integrity and the relationships between those things. A comment may have comments that spawn other comments, right? We have to be able to maintain the integrity of that relationship. So SQL Server just makes it very easy from a relational perspective just to store that information and query it later. So sure. It's really being able to get that information, in something that in this case something that I was comfortable with. I was comfortable with SQL Server, so I knew to run queries against it, knew how to manipulate it. So it was a logical choice to use that for this metadata. Now, physical files like images and Word documents and things like that, or physical content, that we just put in the file system, and then we structure it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's structured in a way that the database can reference and point to that file structure, but it's actually organized in a way that even if you looked at it on its own, you could still kind of figure out where things came from.
Now, what types of Jive content have we moved? Are there certain types that we haven't moved yet, or what have we done so far?
So I mean, we focus on the big stuff, like just Jive collaborative documents. So that typically gets converted into a wiki type file in the SharePoint system, or something that can be rendered as a HTML document. We've also pulled binaries like I said, Word documents, images, just anything that can be uploaded to Jive and commented on and socialized. But we pull that into the file system. We've also done discussions, and there's actually doing some work right now trying to get it to a Jive discussion to convert it to a SharePoint discussion. But that we've actually converted those to wikis as well, and that's been pretty successful with that. Those are the main big things we've pulled. We have pulled like private messages and some basic profile properties out of Jive. There's some other things we're actually looking at doing now too. More of the tasks. I've done tasks manually. A lot of people don't necessarily want to retain that information from Jive and move it forward. But we're actually looking to add that to the tool where you can actually pull task information from Jive projects, as well as video content. So video content, special content in Jive that we need to spend a little bit more time on, but it's actually something that we're going to be focusing on here pretty soon. But we're not currently moving that unless it's a binary. Unless we consider it as a binary file, that's different. But actual Jive video, that's something we're focusing on for the next iteration of this tool.
Great.
Yep.
What else can you tell me about anything else that sounds like the basic components are this command line tool that we run. We've got some Excel sort of mapping things that are involved. It's a SQL Server database. It's a file system. Any other major components of what this tool is or does?
Well, so it does. It has some other additional command line options that if you wanted to do custom navigation updates in SharePoint. So once it's done actually, let's kind of take a step back. So one of the things it does do is if it tries to migrate content into Office 365 or to a SharePoint site of any form, you can actually add a flag to say, okay, if this particular site doesn't exist, go ahead and provision the site first, and then
nice.
Layer in the content.
That's
so
nice.
It kind of has the ability to do that. And then one of the enhancements we're looking at possibly doing is allowing you to choose the template for maybe for each one of those mapped places from Jive. Maybe it's associated to a default template, in SharePoint, or maybe it's associated to a custom template. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something that we're looking at doing. But it can provision basically a default template now in SharePoint, as well as, it lays in all the libraries. You can create new libraries, document libraries in SharePoint, or you can actually layer into the existing libraries if the SharePoint site already exists. It can also update navigation. So if you wanted to set up custom navigation to these new libraries, it sets those up on the quick launch. So real basic stuff there. And then, some of the things we're actually looking at doing too, and I think it'd be pretty cool, and this is something I'd love to see in the tool itself, is the ability to actually get the overview pages out of Jive and get them in some form or fashion in SharePoint. That's something that I've heard other people ask about, and I think it's actually an important thing. A lot of people spend time, organizing and really tailoring their Jive to look a certain way, and if we can somehow get that into SharePoint, I think that'd be pretty awesome. And I got some ideas how to do that, but kind of in development now. So.
Awesome. Tell me some about like profiles and security. How does that work into this? Because I know Jive profiles are important, and then how does the security map? Do we have some way of mapping over the security that's set up in Jive?
Yeah. So one of the first things we do in Jive is we like I said at the very beginning, we actually go get all the people. We get a list of all the people, and that includes like email address or anything that that's assigned to their user account at the highest level. So the basic information like username, email address, just basic, maybe their avatar image. We go after that information. If we need to dig deeper, that's another customization. But we get that basic information at the forefront. So one of the things we do is we take that information and said, okay, let's see if we can look up by email address or by some other attribute that we pulled from Jive. Let's see if we can look up on the corresponding SharePoint, the targeting SharePoint system, to make sure we can identify and map that user. So email address might be one thing we look up by, and it's more like an AD, Active Directory lookup. Let's see if we can find this user. If we can find the user, then we've got a match, and we can basically, associate any content that we're bringing over to that respective user.
Nice.
One of the things we do when we bring over the content is that if we do have to adjust, how user references and things like that are in the Jive content, maybe there's a Jive collaborative document that's got some embedded user links in it. Well, we actually convert those into the appropriate form in SharePoint. So, maybe a Jive user in Jive, but then when we bring it over into SharePoint, maybe it's a Yammer profile link, or maybe it's it's just a standard SharePoint profile link, or maybe it's a direct link to their Active Directory profile. I mean, we have flexibility in how we convert that over, but it's all about finding by email address or finding by a specific identifier from Jive into the target system.
So let me see if I've got this correct. So if you have a file, like is a metadata about a file in Jive that can be moved over, like the last person who modified it or person who created it, that can be mapped and moved over into SharePoint. Is that correct?
At a high level, we can definitely move the last modified. Created, we typically do like a a separate property for that, because SharePoint's a little bit tricky in terms of setting the actual author of content. It wants the actual user to be doing that. So you can impersonate, you can do some tricks to kind of make that work, but and we do the best we can with making sure we maintain that information. So
where you talked a little bit about how we run the tool at different times. Is the tool run on from the client side, or where do people run the tool from?
It can pretty much. The nice thing about having a console is I can pretty much run anywhere. And the fact that we're dependent on the REST-based libraries, really, I'm on the CSOM libraries for SharePoint, and then the Jive REST-based API. We can pretty much run it anywhere. A lot of times it's run on a machine in a client environment that has a substantial amount of disk space, because we're running, we may be pulling a ton of content over out of Jive. We want to have significant space for that. So typically we target a VM that has a substantial amount of disk space and decent CPU memory, so it can run this process. But it can run anywhere.
And it sounds like you said it can run once, and then later on it can run a delta based off of changes that have been made. Is that correct? Did I hear
Yeah,
that right?
it basically it checks to see if it's pulled content previously. If it has, then you can override and say go ahead and force it to be updated, or you can simply tell it to move on. There's command line options for all those. So try to be smart about, let's have different flavors, different options. So if we did want to pull just the stuff that has not been pulled before, we can do that, or we can go ahead and say, give me everything again. That we can. There's flavors of the command line that you can do to do those combinations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the nice thing, that this works together is that you can focus on just a specific Jive place, right? And say, here's a series of command lines back to back that you can use to go and pull content, massage that content into some form that's acceptable by SharePoint, and then another command that pushes it into SharePoint. And you could do different flavors of those 3 or 4 different commands that you have, and then build a script to do all that. So let's say you want to do that for maybe a top 10 list of Jive places. It could be very easy to build a script that does those 4 commands per place, right? And if you wanted to, say you needed to restart for some reason, you had an error, it'd be very easy to pick a specific place and start from that point on.
Gotcha.
So it's just keeping being smart about being that flexibility and applying that to the process.
Of course, I hear you talking command line, and I don't think PowerShell because that's much too new for me. I think back to batch files. I can create a bat file that you're like,
yeah. You can use batch files or you can use PowerShell.
All right, so
Hey, I
let's.
like batch files too.
I do. It's just something about them. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just fond memories of them.
Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about. I know for folks who are listening that the 2-day workshop that we do, and they're just for people who might not be aware of this. We have a 2-day Jive migration workshop where we go through we teach people about sort of this whole process, and we do that initial inventory. We help them with sort of beginning steps towards mapping out the data, and then giving them an estimate and a project plan out of those 2 days. And we end up doing it for a fixed price. Right now, the fixed price is $7,500. That could change, but tell me a little bit. I know you've been involved in those, and
Right.
tell me a little bit more about that 2-day workshop.
So the original workshop was like a 1-day, like all-day deal. We've actually just recently I've chunked it into 2 separate sessions,
Mm-hmm.
and basically like 3 hours at a time, because we can actually go through and we try to establish initial goals, of the workshop itself. Of let's learn a little bit about your environment, or learn as much about your environment as we possibly can. What content types are important to you in Jive? What are you, kind of get a flavor for how much data we're talking about moving. Are there any customizations? Show it's kind of almost an interview process with the customer to say, show us what you got in Jive, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll give you an idea of how the tool works. We give an overview in session 1, the first 3 hours of how the tool works, and show some kind of resulting content and some sample migration details. And then, I said originally we had all in 1 day. Well, that doesn't enable us to kind of go gather and get more information from the customer. So we broke it up into 2 sessions. Now we can actually provide the tool to the customer, let them run it in their environment, and get that first set of things that we talked about, that I mentioned earlier, which is people and places.
Mm-hmm.
So by allowing the customer to run the tool, 1, we prove that we can actually run it in their environment, and we get kind of past that hurdle, make sure there's no issues and everything's happy there.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also get an initial set of data that we can therefore query, load, and present in a more formatted spreadsheet for session 2, right? Kind of jumping into session 2. Say, okay, let's talk through, what do we find? What seems to be jumping out as, we didn't talk about this in session 1. What are the things that jump out in this data now that we need to kind of dig into? What are all the content types that maybe we missed in session 1? Things like video, things like tasks. Do we need to worry about that? So we go through in the workshop, and we have a list of content types that we found are pretty important. We prioritize them.
Mm-hmm.
What are the most important? Which ones? Where does this content type in Jive? Maybe it's a message. Maybe it's a Jive document. Where does it ultimately end up in SharePoint? where do you ultimately want to see it? Maybe you don't want to move it at all. And we kind of flag each piece of content and indicate which ones that the tool already supports and which one does this tool require some customization. So again, these are usually work in progress. It usually indicates, where we need to put our spikes in our backlog. What do we need to actually focus on the tool to do some more specific things? And that's when having the tool as a command line tool is nice, because it's very easy to make changes to it to adapt to the customer situation. So identify those deltas, identify the customizations, and then we go through and the part of the work shape is to try and set maybe what the overall date structure, the milestones and things look like.
Mm-hmm.
When do we plan on, when do we have to start migration? How long do we think it's going to take? What is our cadence? How many weeks are we going to need to do this, or how many days? It just depends how large things are. We set up the risks, so we talk through risks, and just generally get all the information needed at the end of session 2 to put together our product backlog. And then that's when we go off from a 3-wheel perspective, and we produce the backlog based on all the stuff we've learned from session 1, session 2, and then the data we've gotten from running the tool, and we produce a backlog and just a high-level plan for how we would proceed with migration.
And then that comes with an estimate as well, and
right.
Yep. And so they can then make a decision about, and it's typically for these, they're, from what I've seen so far, perhaps you've seen the same thing, these are pretty much driven off of, they have a deadline that is when their Jive is going to get turned off, or they have to make it by some certain date, and we try to sort of work backwards and make sure that we've got an appropriate schedule that where we can do everything we need to do. But I know it's nice in general just having the tool to go ahead and, earlier on in the project, just go ahead and get as much data as you can, at least into SQL Server and file storage, just so you have it there. And it helps everybody sleep at night, that when they do turn it off, that at least you've got an archive.
And that's actually, you could actually look at this tool or just the process itself as you could look at it that we're trying to get a migration done, but maybe you're not really trying to get a migration done. Maybe you're just trying to do data salvage, right? You don't really intend to move this content anywhere other than get it out of Jive and get into a form that you could work with. So we support that as well. It doesn't necessarily have to go from Jive into some other system and be consumed there. It could actually be pulled, organized, and then we actually sit down with the customer and show them how to access that content that's been pulled, and they could choose to stop there if they wanted to. So it's designed so that we could kind of flex in that different way.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate all the hard work you put into this little what has grown up to be a big boy tool. I know it sort of just started out of necessity, but some of the best products in the world are start out by because you need to scratch your own back. It happens.
That's right.
So thank you, Chris, for taking the time to do this. For folks who are interested in more and maybe learning more about the tool, or even better, more about the workshop that we do, definitely reach out to us. There's the obvious way is just through the contact us page on the 3wheel.com website. And let's just have maybe an initial meeting where we talk about what you get in that workshop, because it's great. It gives you all the data you need to make a decision whether to move or not to move, and all done at a fixed price, which is kind of nice. So thank you, Chris, for taking the time to do this. I'll let you get back to the real world and the real work that you need to do. And thanks everybody for listening to the podcast. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.